As you stated, we've prepared for your attention a proclamation imposing a 25% tariff on foreign-made cars and light trucks. This is in addition to tariffs that are already in place on those goods. In addition to, as you said, spurring increased domestic manufacture of cars and trucks, we expect that these tariffs will result in over $100 billion of new annual revenue to the United States of America in tariff revenue.
I think ultimately we could probably anywhere from $600 billion to $1 trillion will be taken in over the relatively short-term period, meaning a year from now, but starting right away. I think we'll go from 600 to $1 trillion within 2 years, and I think we'll be right from the beginning, we're going to be at a very high number, right from the beginning. And right from the beginning, you're going to have a lot of construction jobs, but you're also going to have a lot of automobile jobs. So this is very exciting, but it's also exciting because of what's happening with other aspects. We're going to be doing tariffs on pharmaceuticals in order to bring our pharmaceutical industry back. We don't make anything here in terms of drugs, medical drugs, different types of drugs that you need, medicines. It's in other countries, largely made in China, a lot of it made in Ireland. Ireland was very smart. We love Ireland. But we're going to have that. We're going to have lumber. We're going to free up some of our land. And you'll be able to meet a lot of other standards like fire cuts. If Los Angeles had fire cuts, which they didn't have, that's a gap of half a football field between areas. You wouldn't have had the fires. They would have been contained. But you have fire cuts, and by the way, you sell that wood for a lot of money, a lot of profit is made from that. But we're going to be doing lumber. We're freeing up our land so that so that we don't have to use outside sources of lumber. Energy, we're doing fantastically well at. You know, the energy prices have been coming down rapidly as we increase supply, and we've already done that. We have Chris and Doug are doing a fantastic job on that. That's Department of Energy and Department of Interior. And they're working together hand in hand because Interior has the land and Energy has the ability to do the drilling and do what they have to do. Our coal areas are going to be opened up for clean, beautiful coal. Germany's opening up many coal plants now. You know, they tried the wind and it didn't work. They almost went out of business. They almost went bankrupt. They tried wind, which is a disaster because it's too expensive and it doesn't look good, kills all the birds, a lot of problems. But Germany is now building a lot of coal plants. China is building one a week. Think of that. And they're using coal, which is very powerful. Coal is a very powerful energy. And we're opening up our coal mines again, and we're going to do, I call it beautiful, clean coal. The technology is so good now that coal can give you tremendous power at the same time. It can be very clean. But we're also obviously doing oil and gas and various other things. You can do pretty much whatever you want. We don't like the wind because we think it ruins the landscapes, the plains, ruins them. And it's got a lot of problems. It's also by far the most expensive energy. It looks horrible in the oceans. It's dangerous in the oceans in terms of navigation. And if you look at what's happening with whales, you know, in one area, they lost 2 whales, like in 20 years, washed ashore. And this year they had 17 wash ashore. So there's something happened out there. There's something driving the whales a little bit loco, but they lost 2 in 20 years. And now they lost 17 in a short period of time. So it's something wrong out there. So this is very exciting. This is going to lead to the construction of a lot of plants, in this case, auto plants. And you're going to see numbers like you haven't seen, both in terms of employment. It takes a little while. You're going to have great construction numbers initially, and then ultimately you're going to have a lot of people making a lot of cars. And one other thing, we have the Speaker of the House with us who's doing a fantastic job. And where's Mike? And we're trying to get approved. Mike, thank you very much for being here. We're trying to get approved, if we can. If you borrow money to buy a car, you're allowed to.
Okay, that is U.S. President Donald Trump talking about many things, including whales there at the end. But the big news we were waiting to see was what he was going to do on auto tariffs. And He gave us some information, but not a great amount of clarity. He has signed an executive order, which will be posted on the White House's webpage soon, and we'll bring you that information when we can, putting 25% tariffs on all non-USA made cars and light trucks. He's talking about a tariff that starts at 2.5%, goes to 25%. We're not sure how that scales, what time it comes into effect, but it is fueling more of the instability on one of Canada's most important industries in the middle of a critical national election. Brian Kingston was listening on that. He is the president and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Brian, good to speak with you again. You obviously know a lot more about this than I do, but what clarity did you glean from what the president just said there? How does this affect things?
Well, we're still going to need to see a lot more details, but my understanding is that these tariffs are on top of existing U.S. tariffs. So in fact, you'd be looking at a 27.5% tariff on imports of vehicles and 50% on trucks, because there is already an existing high tariff on light trucks. So significant tariffs. And given that the U.S. imports quite a bit of vehicles, not just from Canada, but globally, this will have a very immediate impact on the vehicle market in the United States. Obviously, deep concern from our perspective, because when you look at the manufacturing footprint in Canada, the majority of the vehicles that we produce here are going into the U.S. market. Our supply chain has been founded that way, and there are no options to send these vehicles to other markets.
Okay, that's a very illuminating point you made. There's a 2.5% tariff already in place on vehicles made outside of North America. So this stacks, that 25 stacks on top of it. There was already 25% on trucks, so that stacks as well to go up to 50%. What I didn't hear there, Brian, was exemptions for CUSMA, you know, the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement. What is your understanding of how it applies, or do we just not know at this point?
At this point, we don't know. Previously, there had been an appearance of some understanding from the administration that we have just signed and implemented a trade agreement, the USMCA, and that agreement allowed for vehicles that are produced with a high amount of U.S. content to enter the U.S. duty-free. If you look at the vehicles produced by the Detroit 3, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis here in Canada, over 50% of the parts and components in those vehicles come from the United States. So what we don't know at this point is whether or not the USMCA will still receive special treatment, and if vehicles that are produced to those high standards will remain duty-free. We simply don't know. But what I can tell you is this is creating a massive amount of uncertainty in the industry at a time where huge investments are being made into this transition to electrification, retooling factories. And this has everybody pausing, because it's hard to go forward with these investments when you have absolutely no certainty about the rules of the game. So I hope we get some more clarity. But even with that clarity, given the way that policy has been changing so rapidly in the United States, it's hard to have any assurances going forward.
Is there any way, Brian Kingston, to reverse engineer from the numbers? I know the numbers that come from the Oval Office are not always clear or accurate, but when they talk about these tariffs potentially bringing in $100 billion in revenue early, does that suggest that we're talking about Asian and European-made vehicles, or would that imply that the North American-made vehicles from Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. get dragged into this somehow? Can we say anything about that with any certainty?
It's too difficult to make a determination based on the information that we have now. Given the figures that the president was citing, I am expecting that this is broadly applied. If you just look at, he was at one point there suggesting upwards of $600 billion. I mean, these are massive numbers. So I would expect this as a broadly applied tariff. The one really important factor here to note, though, is that you cannot assume that you will collect tariff revenue over the long term. If you put a tariff, which is a tax, of this size in place, it becomes very hard to send vehicles into the U.S. market. So in fact, U.S. imports will dry up and vehicle inventories will shrink in the United States, which of course has huge negative economic consequences. So this is the problem with protectionism. You can't count on the tariff revenue. When you put the tariffs in place, you actually stop the trade. Okay,
so we're getting some details as we're having this conversation, Brian, that the president is saying these tariffs will come into effect on April 2nd, Liberation Day as he calls it. It'll start being collected on April 3rd. And he's saying that he said something about if hang on, I don't want to give you bad information, but on that timeline, so this is a week This is next week, right? In the middle of the second week of an election campaign, tariffs are going to hit the auto sector, and your impression is that is broadly applied, so Canada is caught in this, is how you see it.
That's how I understand it at this point. We've heard suggestions that there may have been potential exemptions for U.S. content. But look, even in that case, the tariffs that are being proposed are quite significant and would be quite challenging to overcome. And I just want to underline the importance of this industry. I mean, automotive, it's our second largest export into the United States. The industry employs hundreds of thousands of Canadians. We've seen over $40 billion in new investment into the sector. The health of the Canadian economy depends on the health of the automotive industry. So to have this come forward with such short notice, with serious implications for this sector is very, very worrying. And as I noted at the outset, there are no options to diversify in this sector. This is a north-south supply chain designed very deliberately since the 60s in that fashion. It's not as though you can simply say, well, okay, let's look to Asia, let's look to Europe and find other markets. It doesn't work like that in auto.
Okay, we have one more bulletin from the White House briefing I just want to put to you, Brian, if I can. Trump is saying that if parts are made in America and the car is not, then the parts not tariffed. So if the parts go out, but I don't know, if a car is made in Canada, but the parts come from the U.S., the parts wouldn't be tariffed going out, but then I presumably the car would be going back in. Is that how we should interpret that?
Yeah, so I think the way that would apply is that you would look at a Canadian manufactured vehicle, and what the U.S. would do is calculate how much American content is in that vehicle, and that would be exempt from the tariff. Now, given that the manufacturer is based in Canada, Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, they build with a high level of American content, so that is encouraging. But again, given the size of the tariff being proposed, this is still going to be quite a significant increase on the cost of building vehicles, sending them into the United States. So we'll have to go through those details.
Yeah.
But look, at the end of the day, this isn't good for a highly integrated supply chain.
No, and one last thing, Brian, he just said these auto tariffs are permanent. So we've seen things put on to try to create leverage and then, paused. That doesn't appear to be the play here. He says they're permanent, and you heard him talking about the desire to have Honda build a plant here and whoever build a plant there. I mean, just bottom line, as best you can, Brian, what does this mean for the Canadian auto industry in terms of the future of auto manufacturing, at least in the short to medium term on this side of the border?
Well, David, I am the eternal optimist, and I'm going to continue to be one. Look, there's a long history to this sector, and the U.S. industry is competitive because Canada and Mexico are part of an integrated market. We've just come through a bruising negotiation to put in place the USMCA only 4 years ago. So, there are a lot of good reasons to continue this relationship. And let's not forget, Canada is the largest export destination for U.S.-built vehicles by far. This relationship is balanced heavily in favor of the U.S. So I think the data supports the argument. I'm going to remain an optimist, and I think we will find a path forward, but it could be a bumpy road for the next little while.
Brian Kingston, thank you for navigating this with us in real time as best we can. When we do get more clarity and you get more clarity, we'd love to have you back to talk to you about what happens next. That's Brian Kingston, President and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Okay, as Brian and I were trying to dissect that in real time, the Power Panel is listening to that. Sherelle Eland, Tim Powers, Jordan Leiknitz, Amanda Alvaro. Sherelle, I'm glad we're not writing this on deadline, but here we go again, right? Week 1 of the election, with Liberation Day coming in week 2 of the election. I mean, this is a threat to Canadian industry, and solidifying the ballot question is totally moved in this campaign.
Oh, absolutely. And what it comes down to is, if people do start to feel the pain from this, and I say if, and it should be when people do start to feel the pain from this, it's the question of, okay, well, how are you going to help us now? Because everybody is in campaign mode, everybody's making promises about, okay, elect me and I will do this and I will do that down the road, after April 28th or whenever, a new government gets rolling. But the question becomes, but how are you going to help me because I'm in pain right now? And that's a really difficult question to answer during a campaign because there is no, government's in caretaker mode. So they can't fire up, brand new things outside of, the things that are already been put in place and were already promised. And we heard Mark Carney today talking about, the auto sector specifically. But again, that's not coming tomorrow. So, after Liberation Day, after whatever day comes,
I can't believe that's what it's going to be called.
Whatever the next day is after that, because there's going to be another one. How do you weather that storm and show people I am the right person to, deal with this as, this battering ram comes up from the United States?
Yeah, I mean, Tim, Mark Carney, we're going to try to show a little bit of it in a second. He was down at the border. He was at Windsor today. He's doing this sort of like Windsor, London, Kitchener, I think, sort of, very trade-exposed part of Ontario today. And Pierre Poilievre was in Hamilton last night. I mean, this is not what you want in the middle of an election campaign. What do you make of what Trump is talking about doing there?
Well, first of all, I want to know, what about the whales, David? We've got to find out what happened to the whales. That was but that's classic Trump, right? That's what makes this so frustrating. To quote the premier of our home province, who in a moment of candor described the man as a maniac, you're dealing, look, I can't speak to his mental health and wellness, but all you need to do is look at his behavior. And if you're Mark Carney, if you're Pierre Poilievre, if you're two main contenders, this is a tough one. This is a jello of sorts that won't stick to the wall. It moves around. So what do? Do you take a page out of Doug Ford's book of during his campaign when he was in caretaker mode and find your way down there to do something? Or do you take the posture that Mark Carney has, and it seems Pierre Poilievre has at the moment, to just sit back and get the election done first? It's fascinating, right? Because what has also been consistent, what are we, Wednesday? So these tariffs come in on Tuesday, the new version. Yeah. By the time we get to Monday, are they gone again? That's the most difficult thing. But I think I want to go back to something Sherelle said. It's driving up this mood that our abacus guys have called precarity, precarious circumstances. We've gone from sort of scarcity to this place where people are really worried about the future. And unless all of the leaders in the election campaign are focusing more on that, they're going to find it as difficult, because you're never going to be able to nail Trump down, but you are going to see Canadian precariousness rise. Okay, a few things. I want to bring in just some elements from the campaign today, just sort of to anchor this conversation and what is being promised. Because Liberal leader Mark Carney, he was in the heartland of Canada's auto sector, pitching a plan to protect jobs and the economy. Carney kicked off day 4 of the campaign in Windsor, Ontario, as I said, a city on the front lines of President Trump's trade war. Carney also stopped in London to tour a manufacturing plant before ending the day in Kitchener, where he'll hold a rally tonight alongside local candidates.
What we need to do is build more of those autos and more of each auto right here in Canada. In the new world, that will be an advantage. That will help insulate us from President Trump's trade threats. Well, speaking at the border crossing between Windsor and the state of Michigan, Carney promised $2 billion in new measures to help the auto sector. The CBC's Ashley Burke is traveling with the Liberal leader's campaign. Ashley.
David, Liberal leader Mark Carney began his day at a place that symbolizes the close ties between Canada and the U.S. Ambassador Bridge, the main thoroughfare of trade between the two countries, in a relationship that's now been thrown into turmoil. Windsor is on the front line of Donald Trump's trade war and home to major auto plants that's parts often cross back and forth across the border multiple times during production. Carney calls that a huge vulnerability right now and is proposing a $2 billion fund to boost the auto sector to make it more competitive and protect jobs. He's also promising to prioritize buying Canadian vehicles for the federal government and pitching to build what he called an all-in-Canada manufacturing network so that more car parts are built domestically rather than relying on the U.S. But a union representing auto workers told us that Canada, while it has the facilities and the technology to do this, it would be challenging and costly because of how intertwined the supply chain is. The Liberals' campaign continues to focus narrowly on trying to position Carney as the leader to protect the country from Trump. David?
Okay, Ashley, that's the CBC's Ashley Burke in London, Ontario. So Jordan, there we have it, that like Mark Carney very clearly going to the border city to remind people of what is happening right now. And then Donald Trump is the exclamation point on the end of the day. He's offering $2 billion in aid using the tariff revenue to directly support industry and workers. I mean, how do you see all of this fitting together as voters try to make up their mind in this difficult situation?
Well, I was struck that he's using the same visual that Doug Ford did in the Ontario campaign. And
They may be sharing a playbook here.
Yeah, I think there's something going on here. Yeah, I mean, this is really about him occupying that space and positioning his opponent as Trump. And I think that it is probably most damaging for the Conservative campaign because that's a frame that they do not excel in. There's still a significant segment of voters who have doubts about Pierre Poilievre and whether he shares some of maybe the vision and values of Trump. And that tie has just become toxic for him. So I think that, Carney choosing to have those visuals and to make that announcement today makes a lot of sense. Where I think that there is a bit of an issue is that it's regrettable. He had 9 days as prime minister. He did a lot of travel around. But in that time period, because as Sherelle has pointed out, we don't really have a functioning, we don't have a parliament right now. It's difficult to bring in big measures. We have 125,000 people directly employed in the auto sector in Ontario. This is going to hit them very hard. There was a window, there was an opportunity there to bring in some significant measures to help. Instead, we ended up with some temporary marginal changes in EI. I don't know if that's going to be enough, to be honest, with the impact of these tariffs. And so there's these commitments that we're talking about now, they're for the future, they're for after the campaign, but we are in a situation where there's a large group of workers who are going to need help urgently.
Can they, under regulation, and I asked this question, I truly do not know the answer. I know you can change EI through regulation. The tariff revenue, can they direct that to specific sectors and groups? I don't know. So anyway, hopefully if someone from the government or an expert on that wants to give us a ring, I'd like to know the answer to that. I mean, Amanda, what do you make of this move? There is no parliament right now to respond to this if legislation is required. This is due to come in April 2nd, as of right now, and then who knows what else is coming in on April 2nd. I mean, what do you think this does to where the campaign is at this moment in time?
Well, I think in this case today it was the right announcement at the right time. As you said, it was in the heartland of the auto sector. He talked about this $2 billion fund to increase competitiveness, to protect manufacturing jobs. He talked about fortifying the Canadian supply chain. So he was talking about probably the most relevant thing that he could be talking about today. He also said yesterday he didn't dismiss the idea of export taxes as a retaliatory measure. I don't know what can be put through right now while we have this, this in between during the election. But I don't think those retaliatory measures are off the table.
No, the tariffs can be implemented during the caretaker convention. They can do that. It's just what can they do with the revenue? Sorry to interrupt, but go ahead.
Right. So, but I think that he has spent almost every day, I believe that he's talked about protecting workers, redirecting those funds from tariffs. And he's really positioned himself as the best person to take on Trump, to protect the Canadian economy, to go head to head, to have those negotiations. And I think when we see a press conference like we just saw, which was like a textbook on word soup, when it's so difficult to dissect what the president is saying, what it's going to mean, it takes a number of experts to come in and clarify. But the fact that Carney has kind of positioned himself as a person who is talking about it every day and really vis-a-vis the president, who will be the person who should be sitting at that negotiating table, I think he's well positioned himself to do that.
Okay, the federal leaders obviously will have to respond to this during the campaign. Provincial leaders, premiers are playing a big role in this election. Doug Ford has just tweeted, President Trump is at it again. His 25% tariffs on cars and light trucks will do nothing more than increase costs for hard-working American families. U.S. markets are already on the decline as the president causes more chaos and uncertainty. Trump is putting American jobs at risk. I've spoken with Prime Minister Carney, Ford writes. We agree Canada needs to stand firm, strong, and united. I fully support the federal government preparing retaliatory tariffs to show that we'll never back down.